Sorry. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Intersectionality Awareness Week. Today is Focus Day 5 of Intersectionality Awareness Week, and we will be talking about inclusion and access. I am Daniel Lull. I am the co-founder of ParaPride, and we are very excited about hosting yet another great panel with some of the best speakers from our communities, to which we will introduce you to very shortly. And just so you know, we are pre-recording this event ahead of Intersectionality Awareness Week, and the session will be eventually available on Friday, the 16th of May. So I want to welcome you to today's event and give you a little brief introduction about Intersectionality Awareness Week before I pass you on to Faryal, who will be moderating the session today. Intersectionality Awareness Week, 12th to the 18th of May, is a yearly awareness campaign proudly introduced to you by ParaPride, and the campaign aims to reflect and share and educate the wider society about intersectionality, also known as intersectional theory, which has been originally developed by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, who is an American civil rights advocate and scholar of critical race theory. So intersectionality is historically associated with how people experience overlapping forms of discrimination or disadvantage based on their attributes, such as their ethnicity or their race or socioeconomic status or gender identity, disability, and so on, and basically how these attributes relate to the systems of oppression in our society. Now, if you think of it that way, it kind of like, it doesn't really seem like something that intersectionality necessarily want to be associated with or even celebrate. You know, being disabled, we know that living in an ableist society that has not been built to accommodate the needs of disabled people, that is hard enough. And of course, also being a person of color today is still very challenging. You are likely to experience discrimination and racism and disadvantages in life, and also being queer, being part of the queer community can present a whole lot of other issues, such as homophobia and transphobia and hate crime, and as well, being a woman could present a whole other barriers in life. And so if you start adding all of those things up, it becomes very difficult to live life with overlapping forms of discrimination and vulnerability and disadvantages, especially how those all relate to the systems of oppression and structures of domination. So, but of course, you know, these are all identities who make us who we are, and we don't get to choose them, but we are proud of being people of color. We feel empowered about being disabled, about being queer, and we want to embrace our differences and we want to celebrate them. And we also want to be treated fairly. So basically, with Intersectionality Awareness Week, we want to be able to celebrate intersectional identities by promoting a message of empowerment and unity. We want to share also our strengths, being able to share our strengths and also talk about our struggles. And all of these, of course, are built through our lived experiences. So throughout the week, we will be delivering a range of online events with amazing speakers, focusing on different intersectional communities and marginalized groups that are impacted by the lack of access and inclusion in society. And partnerships is a very big aspect of Intersectionality Awareness Week. Today's event is going to be co-hosted by ParaPride and Inclusion London, and it will be moderated by Faryal, who is part of Inclusion London. And so I'm going to pass on to Faryal. The session is supposed to be 45 minutes long. I've just taken up about 10 minutes. So Faryal, good luck with that. Over to you. I'm going to switch off my screen, and Faryal will be introducing you to the rest of the speakers.
Yeah, hello everybody, and happy Intersectionality Awareness Week. I'm really delighted with to have this brilliant panel of international contributors and speakers. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to our chats. But before that, just a little bit of introductions. So I will start. And thanks for the kind of segue there, Daniel. My name is Faryal, and I am a screenwriter and a campaigner for disability rights and social justice. And I'm here today representing Inclusion London, which is a great disability rights organisation. And we support deaf and disabled people's groups in London to thrive and become more sustainable, as well as being on the front line of campaigning for disability justice. And we're really delighted to be partnering with ParaPride on this first ever Intersectionality Awareness Week. And I'm now going to pass over to our lovely panel of speakers, and I'd really like you all to give a very brief intro into yourselves. So we start with Shani.
Yeah, hi everybody. I am Shani Dhanda. I'm a South Asian disabled woman based in London, and I am an accessibility specialist and a broadcaster on TV and radio.
Brilliant. Esi?
Hi everyone, I'm Esi Hardy. I am a person of colour and a disabled person, a physically disabled wheelchair user. I am based in a village between Basingstoke and Reading, on the border of North Hampshire, and I run a business called Celebrating Disability that provides and enables businesses to develop disability inclusive cultures.
Excellent. And Aubrey, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aubrey, and I am a filmmaker with dwarfism based in New York City. And I also host a web series on social media called Dwarfism History, where I celebrate people with dwarfism throughout history. And I'm just excited to be here.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we're just going to dive straight into our first topic, which is obviously this week is very much about raising awareness and celebrating disabled intersectional identities. And the word itself, intersectionality, it's become very fashionable, hasn't it? It's a buzzword and it's part of the zeitgeist. But also in this kind of upside down world that we're living in now, we're also seeing a Trumpian agenda of a real denigration of diversity as well in the US and definitely here also in the UK. So I wanted to ask lovely panel members, what joy and what challenges have your intersectional identities brought to your life, especially in the context? So who'd like to go first? Effie, would you like to? Oh yeah, please go ahead, Shani. Yes.
Yeah, sure. And this is a really great question. And for me, there's not just like one straightforward answer, because at times it's felt very conflicting, and it's taken me a long time to get to the point where all the things that people told me were my weaknesses about my identity or reasons I wasn't progressing in life actually turned out to be my biggest strengths. So, for example, and people be like, "Oh, it's because you're underrepresented, you're South Asian, you're disabled, have a very visible disability." And I wish people never made me hate my identities. I spent a lot of time downplaying that. I wish I never had to use my energy on that. So for me, it's definitely feelings of conflict. But now I've done the work. Now actually realizing that those are the things that make me who I am. I think what's been particularly difficult is that disability faces an even further sense of stigma in the South Asian community. So not only having to navigate it in mainstream society, but also within my own community, and having to be an educator from a really young age and an activist has been tough.
Yeah, thank you. And obviously, I mentioned this, I did pop you an email before, like I really love all the work that you do, great admirer, and especially on Instagram, the way that I love, all that your profiling, you're going into kind of Sikh community, into good boroughs and talking about access. I think it's been, yeah, really powerful, important stuff. So thank you. Who'd like to go next? Aubrey, would you like to maybe
Or
talk about your experiences?
I love this question also because I love talking about the joy of being disabled. I'm also queer. I'm Black. I have a visible disability as well. And I have always loved the unique perspective that my identities have brought me. I feel actually very lucky despite the turmoil and obstacles that we go through as especially queer people of color with a disability. I think the challenges a lot come from not my own views on myself, but the way other communities and the world and our governments view our identities. As a queer person, I'm oftentimes left out of conversations in queer communities. We have pride, we have queer spaces, but they're not always welcoming or even accessible to people with disabilities. As a Black person as well, we also face similar situations that create obstacles and discrimination, even within people of color, the communities for people of color, or people with disabilities, or who are also queer. And then access is a big thing for my disability in specific. I have to, in my own apartment in the city, have to carry a stool with me everywhere because to even get into my own building, I have to stand on it to unlock the door. So there's just basic level accessibility obstacles that I face every day that create challenges. But nevertheless, I still love, love, love being in these communities. I, again, consider myself so lucky and could not imagine my life any different.
Yeah, thank you. And again, avid follower of yours on Instagram, and I love the kind of humor that you bring as well while you're, discussing it. And could you you had you put out a kind of a short documentary, the average height people, and I was wondering if you could kind of speak a little bit about that as well, because that was just so good.
Yeah, so we're still working on it, but it's essentially going to be a documentary kind of chronicling the lives of people with dwarfism, past and present. And it's being made by a team of people who actually have dwarfism and other disabilities too. Because what I realized as an actor, I grew up performing in the entertainment industry, was a lot of opportunities for little people or people with dwarfism are created and written and filmed and scripted by people who are so far separated from the dwarfism community. So they oftentimes discuss challenges or discuss things that maybe the general public, assumes that we go through, but aren't actually accurate to our daily lives and don't showcase, especially the diversity of our community. Most people, even in my content, will comment, I've never seen a Black little person before. I didn't, they just really have no, even queer little people. We just don't see that representation in media, whether it's fictional or nonfiction. So I've been really excited to start working on this documentary and connect with other people with dwarfism to finally be able to tell our stories the way that we want to. And it's a mix between something more visual and something more story driven, while also with interviews from people with dwarfism from different communities as well.
Excellent. Yeah, that's brilliant. And we are going to share everybody's IG profile as well, so people can kind of, enjoy all the things that you're saying and putting out. And Esi, yourself.
So I echo everything that everyone said. I completely agree. I mean, there's been, I think it goes through different stages in life where you feel the joy and then you feel the challenges more. But definitely the joys of being part of a community that I feel like I really belong to, that I can relate to, and that relates to me as well. And a lot of the people that I know, I wouldn't know if I wasn't disabled. I wouldn't run a disability inclusion business if I didn't have lived experience of disability. But to kind of bring something that hasn't been talked about yet, I think an intersectionality that I find really challenging is perimenopause and disability. I think that when I burst into tears on the train because I've gone in the wrong direction, people assume, oh, bless her, she doesn't know where she's going because she's disabled. Well, no, actually, I wasn't thinking because I lost my memory because, I've got all these hormones that I never had before and those kind of things. There's just adding this overwhelm and making it really difficult to articulate. I think in today's society, especially, and I know we'll talk about this a bit later, the challenges of the compounded oppression and the marginalization and this feeling like a statistic quite often can sometimes make it really hard to find the joy in disability, which I think is really important to say, as in it's really important to find the joy in disability and to talk about it, because disability still has such a stigma that we are, down and out and we can't do anything for ourselves. But then that is battled with everything else we're going through just in our daily lives, really.
Yeah, thanks for that. And absolutely, getting older and experiencing perimenopause and menopause and those, yeah, we need to talk about those much more. I wanted to ask about, well, there's two things that, well, actually one thing which you did mention, Aubrey, which really rings true as a queer person myself, is about access, which, to LGBTQ venues, see, it's still very much, yeah, like even though we have legislation that's like many decades old, the onus is always on the disabled person to prove that they were not able to access something, which is just awful. So I wanted to, yeah, is there any kind of experiences that the panel have had around that? Because I think that, it's a massive issue in terms of we're talking about representation and inclusion, need to be visible and to actually be able to access and get into the building. So this is a real, yeah, it's a scandal really that still, especially in the US and UK, some of the richest countries in the world, that that's just still not, you have new buildings being built often and they're not accessible. So yeah, anybody like to say anything about that?
Yeah, I'm happy to start.
Shani?
I've actually
Yeah.
stopped going to things like concerts and venues now because it's just not worth the time, effort, and energy. And it's something that I really used to enjoy doing. And it's because the barriers start just trying to book a ticket, proving you're disabled, trying to ring the disabled booking line, going through all of that process, then getting there, and then half the time I end up seeing anything anyway. And you just don't feel like you're part of the experience. You just feel like you're just plunked on the end somewhere. And I just thought, I'm not enjoying this anymore. And I have a better view on other people's TikToks. So I just thought, I'm not going to spend my money where it's not valued. And it might be a drop in the ocean and not affect those venues and things. But yeah, that sort of most recent experience.
Yeah. So I'm sorry to hear that, but it's very, yeah, it's definitely feels like access and inclusion and a lot of, especially the bigger venues, is just an afterthought. And Aubrey, you're an actor and you definitely an avid theatre goer. Kind of, what's the accessibility like in New York when it comes to disabled people and theatre land?
I think that it's definitely, I've always just been someone who tries to make things work as best as I can. And I'm, especially now as I get a little bit older, I'm getting better at advocating for myself. And I think that it really just depends on the spaces. And I think what I've especially learned about being back is that sometimes access can be fixed by people just being aware that there's challenges and barriers for people with disabilities, which is why I really try to push for education on social media, because I do think the more people are aware, there are a lot of people who do want to help us and who just literally have no idea because they don't learn about disability in school. They don't see disability representation in media. They don't see disability representation in museums or in shows, or maybe aren't even friends with someone with a disability. I found that some of the shows that I've gone to, they've really had a great setup for when you're buying a ticket. You can say from a list of drop down menu, you can say, I'm low vision, I am a wheelchair user, I need an aisle seat, I need a seat closer up. And I've had some really good experiences actually with ushers and box office and theater staff who are just like, not a problem. And I've even referred some of those techniques that I've given about like just reaching out and being like, hey, I have dwarfism. It's going to be a challenge for me to sit behind a person who's average height. And is there any way I could get an aisle seat? That's usually easier for me to at least be able to see, or a seat closer up. And there's been some actually positive experiences with them being like, not a problem. They get on it right away. They do all of the hard work of communicating and figuring it out so that I don't have to do any of that labor. I don't have to go up to the box office and be like, please let me see. But I do think that there's some challenges as well. Like there's a great restaurant across my street who does a RuPaul's Drag Race viewing party every day. And it's like a great community of queer people, but the viewing party is up the stairs. And I always think I can do that, but it kills the mood a little bit because I'm like, what if I had a disabled friend who couldn't access a flight of stairs? And especially because this flight of stairs only has a railing on one side. So I know for me, I really need a railing on the left-hand side if I'm going up because of my access needs, and there's not one. So it's, I think, a challenge in some regards. And I think that my hope for the future is that more people who are in these rooms and who can access these things look around and are like, well, why is there no disabled people here? And then start to put the pieces together. Well, oh, maybe a disabled person couldn't access the space. Maybe this isn't a welcoming space, even though it's based on inclusion and acceptance and representation that also extends to people with disabilities.
Yeah, no, that's really important points. And you mentioned something about education, which is huge as well. I mean, like I feel very passionate about the fact that the social model of disability should be taught at schools, because that is such a key fundamental to the disability rights movement, disabled people's movement, and also just unlocking people's mind about actually what the barriers are. Because so much it's the disabled person that's a problem rather than, in a lot of people's eyes, when actually the issue is inaccessibility and prejudice. So yeah, that's also something which is so important, and definitely the work that you all do is very much, well, yeah, links into challenging prejudice and dispelling myths. So it's just really good. I wanted to actually just segue. We're talking about access, which is the second area that we said we're going to talk about, which is around accessible transport, which particularly is a passion of mine. I was involved for many years working for a brilliant organisation called Transport for All that does a lot of, campaigning. Obviously, all the things that have been won in London around everything from wheelchair spaces on buses to lifts and level access on the tubes to training for transport staff has been through the activism of disabled people saying, hang on a minute, we want this, we need this is our right to get from A to B. It's such a huge issue, isn't it, transport access, when it comes to independent living, when it comes just being able to access local communities and just to live life. And so I wanted to, really delve into your experiences. And Esi, I wanted to start with you, if you don't mind. What are your transport experiences as a wheelchair user in the UK? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I live in a village. So I think my experiences are quite different. I think they're all different, but I think it's quite different when you live in a village to you live in a town to you live in a city. So I rely on public transport to get everywhere, and I don't drive. So the transport outside of London is quite a lot patchy. You might say, oh, well, it's patchy in London, but from my experience, it's more patchy outside. So there's a shuttle service that I catch, and quite often they cancel that shuttle service without any notice. The shuttle service, luckily it has a guard, but if the guard doesn't see you, then you miss getting on the train. It stops at quite an early time in the evening, which I know is a barrier for more than disabled people. But if it's your only mode of transport for getting in and out, it causes more barriers. And also, kind of in a more generic, more general perspective, I rely on ramps to get on the train because I'm a wheelchair user outside of London. They don't do step-free access. I don't think they've even heard of the term step-free access. So you have to rely on somebody to help you. The other day I was coming back from Bournemouth, and I arrived for my pre-booked assistance, and the platform staff had put somebody else in my spot. and then said it's because I wasn't there 45 minutes early. I'm laughing. I was not laughing, nor was he by the time I'd finished. But so, and what happens is, you know, if you can't get on the train because of the lack of support and the lack of access, you miss what you're doing. So going back to what you were talking about isolation, it compounds this isolation. I have disabled friends who don't use public transport because of the horror stories that people experience, that they themselves have experienced and they've heard from other people. So that stops that person from being, in quotes, independent, because there's more than one way to be independent, but it stops that person from feeling that they can go out on their own and they would be having a nice, safe experience. And also kind of going back to what you were saying, when there's less disabled people on public transport because we can't access it, then the transport teams think, oh, well, we don't need to improve accessibility because look, nobody's using it anyway. So it's this cyclical problem that goes round and round. And kind of linking that back to what you were talking about before about accessibility, when I leave the house, and I'm sure other people too, one of the things I think is, oh God, what's going to go wrong? You know, I might be really looking forward to this event, but what am I going to have to deal with in order to have that good experience? And then one of the things I have to think about is, am I going to be able to catch the train I want to? Is it going to be running? Is there going to be the transport? I can't just jump in an Uber. There's no such thing as Ubers in the village. Or I can't just jump in a taxi because they're not accessible. So what else do I have to constantly be thinking about before I can eventually relax?
Yeah, we're all nodding vigorously there, Esi, because everything that you said, yeah, just really rings absolutely. And it just does astound me. You know, we talk about like driverless cars and all of this space age travel, yet just getting someone to turn up with a ramp or making a lift work sometimes just feels like, you know, it puts into perspective.
And
I wanted to ask,
really
yeah,
say as well.
absolutely. Go ahead.
I wouldn't say quite often, but I've heard people say to me, well, why don't you just move into London? Or why don't you just move into a town? And it's a privilege to be able to do that. So we're not talking about, obviously, because we don't have the time, but we're not talking about accessible housing, but for instance. And Aubrey mentioned it a minute ago that his flat isn't even accessible. So it's a privilege to be able to live in a place where these things are available, and they're not even perfect when you do live in those places.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely a great point. Shani, I wanted to ask you, you're really jet set. I love seeing all of your posts from all around the world. I wanted to ask you, yeah, like what is accessibility like when it comes to planes, and just anything to say about the places that you visited in terms of their transport system, any best practice that you've seen?
Yeah, so I've been to 46 countries, which I'm super
Wow,
fortunate
it's
to have
impressive.
done.
Yeah,
Yeah,
amazing.
I really love traveling, and I'm so fortunate I get to travel for work sometimes as well. And difference is the UK is terrible. Whether it is our transport, our public transport. You know, I live in London, I can't even use the tube because only a quarter of the tube stations are step-free and none by me. So it means I have to spend thousands every year in taxis because there's also nowhere to park. And I don't even mean accessible parking bays, because for every council-owned car park or car parking spaces, there's only one per 38 disabled Londoner. So if you ever find an empty accessible bay, it's like winning the lottery. But then you don't know what the rules are because every borough's got different rules. But sometimes flying can be, it's hit or miss. And because you've got to get there so early, sometimes that helps because you've got time to sort things out sometimes. And I travel with a manual chair, but I bought one that folds so flat.
I think she's very frozen. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I think we've frozen in a very animated start, so hopefully we'll come back soon. but yeah, maybe whilst Shani does, maybe we can move on, Aubrey, to just to talk about yourself, and I'd love to hear about your experiences, yeah, in New York, and what is the transport access like in New York City?
Yeah. So for me, I came from moved previously from Arizona where I did have a car. I had car pedal extensions, and that was the easiest transportation for me because I could get accessible parking. Here we have usually a few more than I think maybe in other places of the world when it comes to accessible parking options. But moving to the city, it's definitely challenging because the train situation and the subway system is not built to be inclusive at all. It's a struggle even for able-bodied people. You could get down to a train and have to take like 4 flights of stairs, which means you have to take like 4 flights of stairs back. There's a lot of walking between transfers. And even the accessible elevators they might have are not always in service and are oftentimes people with suitcases and luggage, and you have to wait a lot of times to even use them in the first place. But I'm lucky enough where I can, on a good day, do the stairs, do the train. But when my body is tired, because I'm a body that's gone through lots of surgeries and have, arthritis and chronic pain, and it can be very inaccessible in that regard because of the way that the system is set up to not be inclusive. And I've been thinking, I used to use a wheelchair when I was younger and have some little people who live in the city that I'm friends with who have opened up my eyes to maybe buying myself a new electric wheelchair. And it's really opened my eyes to like, that's going to be a whole new challenge exploring transport when it comes to having a wheelchair now, because even though there are lots of accessible options for like you can go on Lyft or Uber or taxis that might have a ramp, this one would be collapsible, so I could go up the ramp with it and collapse it in the back, but those are expensive. And they're not everyone has the money or the resources to continually be able to afford stuff like that. So it's definitely been a challenge. And I think New York City is different for every disabled person, every little person, every wheelchair user, anybody who uses mobility devices. But yeah, it can be quite the challenge. And I've also found a lot that even though they have spots on the train that are supposed to be reserved for people who have wheelchairs or who are disabled, you get on there and there's lots of at least people with non-visible disabilities using those spaces, and they don't seem to really care that you might need to use those seats, or there's again sections that they even removed seats from to fit people with wheelchairs on, and you'll always see them just overcrowded. You never see those spaces, and I always will see people with wheelchairs in the subway station and think, I wonder what your experience really is like getting on these trains. Do people move? Do they try to make that space accessible for you that's meant for you in the first place? It's interesting. It's interesting.
Thanks. And Shani, we're going to definitely come back to you. You were mid speech, but just to say, Aubrey, yeah, thanks for painting that picture for us. And I mean, just to say 2 things that I'd say are definitely common in the UK, like that take up of space that's actually reserved for disabled people. Like, buses are only accessible in the UK and in London because disabled people chain themselves to buses, fighting for a wheelchair space, and often it's full of, there is a buggy there, and despite training, and even there's an automated sign that says please fold up the buggy, often it doesn't happen, so it's really frustrating. And the other issue absolutely is maintained, so you can put a lift in a subway or a tube station, but it needs to be maintained, and same to go with escalators and things like that as well. So yeah, there's definitely lots of challenges there. So coming back to you, Shani, you were mentioning, your plane travel, kind of the accessibility of aviation industry, and what you've experienced. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I was also saying that I bought a specific manual wheelchair to take with me that folds so flat it fits in the overhead cabin because such a high number of wheelchairs are damaged. But what a big difference I've noticed is like even if I go to a developing country, I still get really good access, if not better. And I think it definitely reflects the culture of the country I'm going to as well. I just don't think we're very good at it in the West. Um, but I also do have to say, I feel like I experience less disability in America. And I think that's because people are so fearful of the ADA, whereas the Americans with Disabilities Act. Whereas in the UK, it's actually very hard to hold somebody account for any type of disability discrimination. We have an equivalent law, but very expensive. You know, it's very hard. Whereas I believe, Aubrey, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but in the US, it's much easier and just people know about it much more and they don't want to be sued as a result. So I have all of these different experiences, but definitely, especially in places like Asia, South Asia, and the East, I have really good experiences in terms of accessibility, and it's usually the rather than the infrastructure.
Yeah, great. Would you like to come back, Aubrey, on?
Yeah, just to
Yeah.
add one thing,
Yeah.
I think the thing too about the ADA is that there's been so many times I've gone to a place and they have the little ADA accessible sign on the door, but there's a giant step to get in there. They don't have a ramp. That some places will have a ramp that they can pull out if you alert someone in advance and go, ask someone to go in for you and they'll put it down for you. But they're tight doors. Go to a place with an ADA sign, but the doorknob is higher than even an average height wheelchair user would be able to reach, let alone a little person. And I think although there is the fear of, like, as you were saying, they could get sued if it's not accessible, I can't see a wheelchair user being able to fit through, the aisles in the place itself. You go to a restaurant, all of the seats are high tops. How is a little person or a wheelchair user going to transfer into those? The bar is super high. There's more stairs inside. If there is, rarely ever an elevator. So it's all stairs. So you really only have limited options if you are someone with a disability. So I think that it's one of those things where I think a lot of people try to skirt around the ADA and sometimes they go under the guise of it being accessible. And it's like, accessible to who?
Yeah. And also, or maybe just trying to make themselves look good, where actually the reality is very different. I mean, we do in the UK have a number of activists who do use the Equality Act and do sue service providers and transport providers as well, on quite a regular basis and talk about it. Doug Paulley is one who is very active when it comes to trains, a nemesis of inaccessible trains. But yeah, that's definitely the legislation. Whilst hardly fought, we fought so hard, it's been fought so hard for, like, yeah, the implementation of that feels like light years away. I wanted to segue now into the next section and actually pick up something, Shani, that you mentioned, which is, I guess, the additional cost of having to pay out money and deal with inaccessible services. When it came to, you talked about taxis, and it comes into the next topic that we wanted to cover, which is about money, and it's about the welfare benefit cuts that have been announced by the UK Labour government, which is basically out of nowhere because it was not mentioned in the manifesto, even though they were probably planning it for a while. They have basically wanting to balance the books on the backs of disabled people, and cut really crucial benefits, including the personal independence payment. And this has been met with a huge amount of opposition and protest by disabled communities, deaf and disabled communities, and also many sections of society, because it's just so unfair, and awful. And I wanted to just get the panel's response on this. And Shani, I know that you've been very outspoken. You've been on national TV as well, speaking about this issue. So yeah, just please share your views.
Yeah, lots to say on this. Essentially, in a nutshell, for over a decade, our government, with the backing of the media, has relentlessly pushed a very damaging narrative that paints disabled people as nothing more than, benefit cheats or scroungers or work shy, which couldn't be further from the truth. So much so that 61% of the British public thought that the government wasn't doing enough to tackle disability benefit fraud. And when it comes to PIP, personal independence payment, which is a benefit that helps to offset these unavoidable extra costs, it's nothing to do with unemployment. The government's own figures show that the fraud rate is less than 1%. They're trying to save money, but on the backs of disabled people over something that is a non-issue. So it's just been horrific, and I think so barbaric on so many levels, and sadly is only going to push even more disabled people into poverty when the current rate of benefits isn't enough to stay out of poverty. It is already pushing people into deep poverty and destitution.
Yeah, absolutely. And such an important point about when it comes to benefit fraud and that narrative of scroungers, and certainly working for many years, like advising deaf and disabled people and communities. The reality is that there's a lot of people entitled to benefits that don't know they're entitled and don't claim, actually. And that's like a very large percentage of people. Esi, would you like to say your views on this?
Yeah, definitely. So I wanted to talk about it from a work perspective, but also wanted to share a very, very quick experience that I had last week. So I went to the doctor because I needed some ear drops. So it was really nothing to do with anything to do with disability. It was ear drops. And he said that it was my fault that I had an ear infection because I use a home kit. And I said, well, I've been using it for years and it's worked fine. And he said, well, you know, essentially that I should have paid £80 to go to Specsavers or somewhere instead of. And I just said, actually, it's really unfair for you to say that. You have no idea what my situation is. With the current impact on disabled people, on benefits being cut, how dare you make me feel like that? And I said to him, I really hope that you would not do it again now that I've said that. You know, I can advocate for myself, but the next person that walks in here might not be able to, and they might walk away feeling worse about themselves because of what you've said. But I really wanted to talk about it in terms of the irony of the Labour government trying to push disabled people back into work. So following on from what Shani's saying about kind of this misrepresentation of us being lazy and us being scroungers and us being work shy, pushing us back into work when actually they're making cuts to access to work, which is the funding, grant funding that supports disabled people in work with their access requirements and reasonable adjustments. And also the extra cost on NI payments for employers, national insurance payments, which means that businesses can't afford to pay to commission suppliers like us to come in and teach them what they need to know about accessibility and inclusion. So I just think the whole thing is completely ironic, completely appalling, and just further kind of embeds this idea of the stereotype of disabled people.
Yeah, some really powerful points there. And also just to bring in the role of inaccessible transport as well. You know, obviously there is a lot of working from home, but still some workplaces still want people to come into the offices, and, you know, try traveling in the rush hour, you know, it's at best of times, you know, it's absolutely packed and inaccessible, particularly if, you know, whether anything from neurodivergent, if you're, you know, in wheelchair, massive challenges. And very frustratingly, they never talk about accessible transport in these conversations. And Aubrey, I wanted to ask you about the situation in the US, because obviously Trump administration is having a huge negative impact on organizations who are advocating for gender equality, mental health, social inclusion. It's actually having an impact across the world. And I just wanted to ask you, you know, how is this impacting the LGBTQ disabled community?
Yeah, I think we all share the same, wherever we are in the world, it seems that we have this general populace who believes that people with disability just live off of the government and we get checks from the government and you're disabled, go get, apply for government assistance. And
Mm,
if you are eligible, at least my government does everything possible to make sure that it's super hard to get benefits. I was myself told when I applied when I was younger that even though I have dwarfism and even though there's, lack of options when it comes to there's so many stores that say to work as a cashier, you have to lift 50 pounds, which in itself is ableist. It's a sly way of saying no disabled people. So I think,
mm,
at least with my educational content, I try really to highlight people with disabilities who are across so many different job fields because
mm,
people, again, really do think that not even that we're lazy, but that we're incapable. And that's just far from the truth. People with disabilities are forced to be resourceful and forced to be versatile and forced to be problem solvers and think on our feet because of the challenges we just face living life and going outside. And we are a huge, huge benefit to the job market. And it's been really sad seeing over time, even through my own historical research, how the US has gone from the president 10, 20, 30 years ago used to have a week in America where it was like encouraging businesses to hire more people with disabilities and encouraging awareness around that. And now you have our current administration um, not only taking away like the whole DEI thing really does affect Black people. And now we have, I think, 17 states trying to push back on the ADA requirements. And then
mm,
you have, the current attack against trans people, which does trickle
mm.
down to other queer people. I think that's the thing that I wish more people would realize is that
Absolutely, I totally agree with you. Yeah.
attack against trans people, like where do you think that's going to end? That's not only going to affect cisgender women, that's going to affect every other, queer person. And I mean, there are already talks, obviously, about repealing, gay marriage, laws and stuff like that. And I think as someone who's involved in every one of those communities, it's made it very difficult. And it's been really sad seeing, so many businesses now being able to discriminate more actively as if they weren't already
Mm.
before, but now they
Yeah,
have
no, absolutely.
now they have the government kind of being like, no, it's okay. You don't have to hire disabled people. That's just, you don't have to hire unqualified people. And you have our own president who specifically called out people with dwarfism when talking about a recent
Mm,
plane disaster, saying that it was at the fault
yeah.
of companies hiring, and he listed different types of disabilities and one of them was little people as if we aren't qualified people. I mean, there's people with dwarfism who have worked in aviation, who have worked for NASA, who have been mechanical engineers, who have literally built submarines and ships and planes for our countries and for countries around the world. Yet now it's this really specific attack against Black people, queer people, and specifically people with disabilities within the workforce. And I just think that's appalling. It's appalling. And it leaves no options for people with disabilities to find employment, and the government's not going to give them the checks like everyone assumes that they are. So I think that we just really need more awareness and more people speaking up and talking about the power that we do contribute to society at large, obviously, but specifically the labor market.
Yeah, brilliant points. Thank you so much. It's really important. Definitely the way that you talk, and we're seeing that, as I mentioned before, that Trumpian influence here as well. And we've got the Reform Party, which have won. They're now controlling councils, and the first thing they're talking about is, you know, scrapping diversity inclusion, as if that's going to, heat pensioners' homes, or is that's going to kind of like, alleviate people in hardship. It really is that kind of culture war, and they're dragging disabled people and people of color and Black people to the front line of that. I guess I wanted to maybe try and bring the conversation to conclusion, but ask about what you think we can do about this agenda, because it does feel depressing. It feels very dark. But yeah, all of you in the work that you do are very much, whether it's the joyous work that you're sharing, or whether the kind of work that you're doing to kind of tackle prejudice and discrimination in the workplace, all that kind of trying to the hidden history as well, which I think is so important. But what do you think we can do? And unity, I guess, is also really important, right? between different identities and like whether that's turning up for trans pride or that's the other thing. So yeah, just wanted to ask so we can leave with some hope.
Can I start?
Yeah, please.
So I think there's lots that we can do. So I think that some of the things we can do is support each other. And I know it sounds like a really obvious one, but I think it's such an important one. So yesterday lunchtime, I put up a post, and I find that posts always go further when there's a picture. So I put a picture of myself, the amount of people that responded, both disabled people and non-disabled people, sharing their experiences of a similar thing that I shared in the post, I think it really it goes to show how much support and advocacy can do. And also, I think there's more that we need to do to re-galvanize the disability movement in the UK and maybe in the US as well. You can talk on that, maybe, Aubrey. Recently, one of the forerunners of the disability movement in the UK, John Evans, passed away. And the disability movement was started in like the 70s and 80s. And so most of the people, the activists that started that, they're not around anymore. And I think that we really need to re-galvanize that movement. I think there's lots going on in pockets, but I think that we really need to come together as a community and remember that we're working towards the same goal and show each other how to activate each other and advocate for the change to do so.
Thank you. That's great. Shani, you have some thoughts to share on this?
Yeah, I really echo what Esi said there. I've been really impressed in recent months with how people have come together and accessible ways of protesting and campaigning, because not everyone can get to London to stand outside of Parliament, and I was really happy to see online protests and people getting together, the amount of people that are doing the work to share information online to make it easier to understand. So that it's been really nice to see that. I think also it's just like for everyone to just look after themselves in this. Like it definitely took a toll on me doing those whole week of interviews, like justifying disabled people's existence, why PIP is not an unemployment benefit, and it was constant, and I was happy to do it. I wanted to do it, but it did take a toll on me. So it's also making sure we look after our own mental health, and because nobody else is going to come in and look after me, like I have to look after myself first. And it was remembering that too in this process. And I think we have, if you are able to, and if you want to share your story, like share how these changes might impact you. And there's lots of different ways to do it. You can even do it anonymously as well. And because I think there's so much narrative and rhetoric from one side and not enough from our side and the reality. So I would love to see much more of that.
Excellent, thank you. And Aubrey.
I still think there's a lot of hope. I do think, again, just through my own advocacy, I found, especially living in the city where a majority of my audience lives, so many able-bodied people coming up and having these genuine conversations about things they've learned and things they've adapted and things they've called out from their own friends or people online because they've learned just more about dwarfism and specifically the discrimination that we face on a daily basis as just disabled people in general, like the challenges that I face. A lot of you guys could also, relate to when it comes to people violating our autonomy. People, I know for me, people will often come and feel like they can just touch me because I'm disabled. And I know a lot of wheelchair users are always like, oh my God, that happens all the time with people just pushing my wheelchair. And I don't honestly think that, I always say I don't think disabled people should be, or we don't have to be advocates. It's not our job to advocate because we have a disability and we live in an inaccessible world. But I do think there is so much power in doing that. And I think if people just in our disabled communities remember that we deserve to take up just as much space as the next person, And you don't necessarily have to come at it with a, I have to be, the voice of the disabled community or the voice of my own disability type, but just be like, no, I'm a person. We do have something called equality. We do all deserve the right to be in spaces, be in community with other people, have equal access to things. And as much as there is a lot of, far right talking points and discrimination in our government and society towards us, there's also a lot of people who just genuinely are unaware. There's so many people who will take a time to listen. And I think that's the power of sharing our stories in whatever capacity. That could be locally in your community. That could be attending a town hall. That could be having a social media account. That could be advocating at a protest. And I found personally lately, I've gone to more protests or panels or things where it's run by non-disabled people, but they'll have a whole accessibility list. Like, here's exactly all where we're walking. These are the access points. We have a shuttle service. And they're trying to do it. And speaking at colleges as well has been such a amazing reminder for me as well, that there is a large portion of young people who are taking in all of this and they're wanting to learn. And they're realizing that the pieces are not connecting when it comes to inclusion for disabled people outside of their own communities. So I think that just having a reminder that there are amazing people, disabled and non, who want to see us all win and want to create a better world for us. And historically, we've always fought against our governments. Disabled people, marginalized communities have always been oppressed by our governments, but we've always created change by being in community with each other and by uplifting each other and recognizing people outside of our own identities and advocating and speaking up. So I think it's just a great reminder to not lose hope, however, depressing and scary it can be. I think that there is always a light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that even in my own life, I've seen a lot of changes so far. So
excellent, thank you. I mean, that's a great way to kind of just, come to bring the discussion to a close, but it's been fantastic talking to you all, and really look forward to seeing what you're up to next as well. And as I said before, we'll share your websites and your IG profiles so people can also kind of follow you. That's great. Thank you.
Sorry,
really
does
enjoyed
IG
that conversation.
Does IG stand for Instagram?
Yeah, that's right.
I'm a bit of a Luddite. I don't.
I know, that's why I mentioned websites as it as well.
I do have a link to it.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. We'll share that. Excellent. That was brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everyone. It's been so great. I've been listening in the background, and it's just been such an amazing session. I've really enjoyed listening to all of your opinions and comments and points, and it's just been very informative and very relatable, all the things that you said. So thank you so much. It's been absolutely great. And thank you so much to Faryal for moderating the panel so well. And a big thank you also to Ali, who once again has provided VSL for us. So yeah, thank you. Can I just I'm going to press stop. But can you stay on for a second? Thank you. I'll press stop. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Oh.